good to be with you this morning. When we told the kids that we were going to come down here and I was going to preach, our daughter, who's 6, said, "But Daddy, you're not a preacher, you're a song leader." Which is true. That'll give you some idea of what we're dealing with at home right now. We're glad to be here, and because I am a song leader and not a preacher, I would ask you to get out your songbook. We're going to use that during the lesson this morning. And open your Bibles to Mark chapter 5. I appreciate the Bible class this morning, in particular because thinking through 1 Peter chapter 1, talking about learning to rejoice, learning to trust in God in the midst of the trials that Peter was talking to his audience about, thinking about the trials that we face and what we can learn from his teaching to them, and also thinking about verse 13, about how we fix our hope and how that helps us in the trials that we face. And so Peter's writing this letter, and I wonder, where did he learn that from? Where did Peter learn to fix his hope on the grace that will be brought at the revelation of Jesus Christ? When did he learn to trust in God in the midst of the storms of life? So I want to look at a story where that happens, a very familiar story. I said Mark 5, I meant Mark 4, so I apologize for that. But now it's a surprise to you where we're going to be. Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. I want to look at a very familiar story. This is Jesus calming the storm. And I want to talk about some applications that I hope will renew and strengthen our trust in God. And take this discussion of rejoicing and trusting that we've already started this morning just a little bit further. So when we get to this story of the beginning in verse 35, this is the middle of a much longer story. Jesus has been teaching all day. It's been, I think, if I were in the audience with if I were there in his audience, I would have been very tired at this point. If you read the teaching to us, because we've been studying these stories for a long time, we go, oh, parable of the sower. Yeah, I know that one. I know the applications, the soils, that's fine. This is the first time these people have heard that. In fact, they're so confused that some of them have to come to Jesus afterward and say, Jesus, what did that mean exactly? Have you ever listened to two technical experts discussing something in their area of expertise, and you're trying to listen and it feels like your brains are just running out your ears? You have the AC repairman over and the foreman and the worker are talking about how it's going to get fixed, and I don't know what the numbers and letters, what do these things mean? Or maybe you can remember in there as you can, and you're pretty sure it's just not sticking. And do you remember how something very technical like that, when you're trying to keep up with concepts that you're barely grasping? I imagine that's how the disciples felt after all these hard parables. They're still wrestling with these soils and the seed that grows up and it's a big tree. What does that mean again? And then Jesus says, at the end of the day, after all this has happened, Jesus says, let's get in the boat and cross the sea. That would be like Jesus saying, let's get in the car and drive to Tampa. Excuse me? At the end of the day, we're tired, it's late, and you want to take a 6-hour car trip now? Mark also tells us in verse 36, it says that they took him just as he was, and the implication there seems to be that they didn't take any provisions with them. Jesus didn't come fully prepared for a crossing of the sea. In fact, it seems like, contextually, the plan may have been to just cross the sea quickly, camp out for the night, and come back the next day to do some more preaching. So this is supposed to be a quick trip. They're not prepared for anything more strenuous than that. They don't take provisions for a night on the lake. They don't take food. They don't take a warm cloak. That seems to be what's implied here. And so if I were one of the disciples on board, we're rowing out into the water. I'm looking around. Where's our camping gear? Where's our food? We don't have any of that. It's dark. It's going to get cold. And we're already tired. And so you think, okay, this is going to be rough. We'll probably be okay, but this is not going to be my favorite night ever. And then, just when you think it can't get any worse, a huge storm hits. Verse 37. Now, these storms are actually pretty common on the Sea of Galilee. You might know some of these details, but they're caused by the fact that the Sea of Galilee is about 300 feet below sea level, but there are mountains all around it, including Mount Hermon, which is a very tall mountain, which is very close by. And as the air temperature difference builds up during the day, it gets hot down low and the air is colder up high, then at night, the hot air will rise and the cold air will come rushing down to replace it. And it can cause very bad windstorms. In fact, the Legacy Standard actually uses the word windstorm there in verse 37. A great windstorm arose. It's not necessarily a thunderstorm. It may be really what we would think of as a tornado. It's mostly wind and a lot of upheaval. In fact, in his account of this story, Matthew uses the word seismos in Greek, which you might recognize the root of the word seismograph. It's what we use for measuring earthquakes. It's a shaking. Imagine an earthquake on the water. That's what they're dealing with. Winds and waves that are threatening to swamp the boat. And so you're in the boat. Well, you start bailing because water's coming over the side. You start rowing because the sail's not going to do you any good in this kind of a storm. And you decide that now things are as bad as they could possibly be. And then you turn around and Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat. He's not rowing. He's not bailing. He's not doing anything. He's not looking for land. He's asleep. And if I was in that boat with them, I think I would start to panic at this point. The disciples certainly did. In verse 38, they cried out to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Let's sing the first verse of Master, the Tempest is Raging. Number 189. We'll sing just the verse and omit the chorus. 189. Apologize. Do mi so. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high, the sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep? Most of us have probably never been in this kind of danger before, out on an open boat in the middle of a storm on the sea, but I think we've all felt that sense of powerlessness and of being overcome by the circumstances of life. Maybe you've been through a period of your life where it seemed like everything that could go wrong did, and then things just kept getting worse. Job loss, an unexpected medical crisis, huge debts, family drama that escalated, and then just when it seems like everything has gone wrong that possibly could, the car breaks down. And I think what makes these kinds of situations hard is that we're not really prepared for the crisis, because why would you be prepared for something so catastrophic? And so when it hits, it feels like the things that we are looking to for stability and comfort just don't cut it anymore. We thought that somebody ought to be bailing the boat, and they weren't. We thought that somebody ought to be rowing, and they're asleep. And it's easy to think, like the disciples did, Jesus, do you not care that I'm perishing? Sing the second verse of Master, the Tempest is Raging. Do me so. Master, in anguish of spirit, I bow in my grief today. The depths of my sad heart are troubled. Oh, hasten and save, I pray. Torrents of sin and of anguish sweep o'er my sinking soul. And I perish, dear Master. Oh, hasten and take control. When our lives become chaotic, and it seems like everything that can go wrong has, I think we need to remember this story. Jesus wakes up, and according to Matthew's account, he stands up in the boat. If you've ever been in a rocking boat, big or small, you can imagine the disciples' surprise when he does this. I was once on a cruise ship in the Gulf of Mexico that went just around that very outside edge of a hurricane at night. And the ship was rocking so bad that you couldn't walk down the halls. You just bounced off the walls all the way down. There were 6-foot waves in the indoor swimming pool. We could barely stand up on a boat as big as that was. Imagine standing up in a boat like this. But Jesus stands up and he says, not to the disciples, but to the waves, peace. Be still. And I don't know if he used a parent voice when he said that, but I kind of imagine that he did. Be quiet. Let's sing the chorus of Master, the Tempest is Raging. Do me. The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons, or men, or whatever it be, no waters can swallow the ship where lies the Master of ocean and earth and skies. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, peace, be still. So then Jesus turns to the disciples in verse 40 and he says, why are you afraid? You still have no faith. This miracle, one thing that's interesting about it is that when we think of the miracles Jesus did, we think of feeding the 5,000 or healing lots of people all day in Capernaum. These miracles that lots of people saw as evidence that Jesus was who he claimed to be. That we often talk about, that's the purpose of miracles, is to show that Jesus is who he claims to be. But these disciples already believe in Jesus. No one else witnesses this. Mark says that there were other boats with them. It's not clear from the stories that follow when they crossed the sea that any of the other boats made it this far. They may have turned back or something. It doesn't seem like anybody except just the disciples in the boat witnessed this. And yet he does this amazing miracle. And I think it's to show the disciples, and then of course to show us as readers, that nothing is too hard for Christ to overcome. But with this important caveat, he's going to fix the problem in his way, not in ours. I think the disciples probably wanted Jesus to wake up and row, or bail, or look for land, or at least say, yeah, good job, keep going. That's not that, because that was the only way they could think of to fix the situation. Now, I want to make this point. I think it's important for us to understand. I think the disciples did the right thing waking Jesus up. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. They needed his help, and they went to him for help. That's what we do when we have problems in our lives. But they showed no faith in the way they asked for his help. They said, "Do you not care that we are perishing?" The words that they used to ask for help express their lack of faith in Jesus' power to actually do anything. And of course he cared. Of course he cared that they were afraid and helpless and struggling. But, as we've seen, he knew that they weren't perishing. But, too often I find myself so wrapped up in the emotions, the terror, the turmoil of things that seem to be going wrong, that I think, even just for a minute, even God can't fix this. I say that because my attitude is wrong. And I'm doing what the disciples did here. I'm limiting God to solutions that I can imagine. I think God should start rowing. I think God should start bailing. And what God says is, you have no idea what I can do. And especially when we feel overwhelmed or panicked at the circumstances that we're facing, I think we are in danger of limiting God's power to solutions that we can comprehend. But God is not limited by the things that limit us. He's not overwhelmed by the things that overwhelm us. Turn to number 461. We often, like the disciples, won't even be able to imagine the solution that God has in store. And so the important lesson, the important truth for us to remember is that God will take care of us. It may not look like what we want it to. It may not be anything we've ever imagined. God will take care of us through every day or all the way. So me. Be not dismayed, whate'er betide, God will take care of you. Beneath his wings of love abide, God will take care of you. Through days of toil when heart doth fail, God will take care of you. When dangers fierce your path assail, God will take care of you. No matter what may be the task, God will take care of you. Lean weary one upon his breast, God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. Turn to number 457. 457, how firm a foundation. 457. So when the storms come, let us remember that peace comes from Christ and not from how smooth the waters of our lives may be. And if that's the case, then maybe just praying for the hard things to go away is like the disciples saying that Jesus didn't care if they drowned. Maybe just praying for that expresses the weakness of our faith in God's ability to sustain us. I don't mean that it's wrong to pray that God would take away the difficulties that we face. Jesus prayed for that exact thing in the garden before he was crucified. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. It's not wrong to pray that. But perhaps we should also pray that our faith will endure in the difficulties and that we will learn the lessons that God intends us to learn in the time that it takes him to take the difficulties away. Because Jesus prayed that too. He prayed, "Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done." And I think what that means is, not my will, but your will be done, and may I play the part in your plan that you intend me to. That it was necessary for Christ to suffer. It may be necessary for us to suffer as well. As the Hebrews writer points out in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8, Christ learned obedience from the things he suffered. This is really a direct reference in Hebrews 5 to the crucifixion and to his prayers in the garden beforehand and what he learned from that suffering. He learned obedience, and that made him qualified to be our high priest because he had to obey just like we do. And so he knows what it feels like to have to obey even when you really don't want to because it's difficult, to suffer when God requires it. And so as our high priest, Jesus pleads for us to the Father, and he walks alongside us in our most difficult trials. How firm a foundation is based on really many promises and reassurances from Scripture, from one end of the Bible to the other. If you have some time later, I would encourage you, there are even more verses to this song than are in the book. Look up those verses, read them, find the passages that they're based on. This song and all of its content can be a great source of comfort to us to remember the promises that God has made to us. But it's especially based on Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 and 6. For he himself has said, "I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you," so that we can confidently say, "The Lord is my helper, I shall not be afraid. What will man do to me?" Let's sing How Firm a Foundation. Oh, so how firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid, for your faith in his excellent word. What more can he say than to you he has said? To you unto Jesus for refuge hath fled. Fear not, I am with thee, oh, be not dismayed. I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my gracious omnipotent hand. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never, no never forsake. God intends that we emerge from the storms of our life stronger and more faithful than when we went in. And that is often not a very comforting thought. I know that. We don't know the plan. We may not actually ever understand how God worked it out. But God intends for us to be stronger as a result of the things that we endure. Turn back to number 189, Master, the Tempest is Raging. The third verse of this song is, after the storm has ended, the terror is over, the elements sweetly rest. Earth's sun in the calm lake is mirrored in heavens within my breast. This verse reminds us that we need Jesus all the time, and not just in a moment of crisis. In fact, I this is maybe my favorite part of the song. The third verse recalls another moment in a boat on the Sea of Galilee when they've been up all night and Jesus does something unexpected. It's the story of the miraculous catch in Luke chapter 5, verse 8. It's some significant parallels. It's many of the same disciples. They've been up all night. They are striking out. Things aren't going the way they hope they would. And Jesus says something that doesn't really make sense. He doesn't stand up in the boat and tell the fish to jump in, but he does say, put your net on the other side. And they do, and the fish are there in abundance. They haul them in. But do you remember what Peter says after that happens? He falls down and he says, go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. The third verse of Master of the Tempest is Raging instead says, linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more. When we come through a storm like this, I hope we realize that we need Jesus there with us all the time. We're not going to ask him to go away. I don't think Peter really wanted Jesus to go away. It was a reaction to Jesus' power. But the words of the song, I think, capture the attitude we ought to have. That Jesus is our only hope, and we need him to stay with us. Our only hope is to trust the one who controls the winds and the waves, and who said to them, peace be still, and who still, in the midst of our trials and storms, says to us, peace, be still. Let's sing the third verse and chorus of this song. Be so. Master, the terror is over, the elements sweetly rest. Earth's sun in the calm lake is nearer, and heaven's within my breast. Linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more. And with joy I shall make the blessed harbor, and rest on the blissful shore. The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons, or men, or whatever it be, no waters can swallow the ship where lies the Master of ocean and earth and skies. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, peace, be still. And so, do I need to offer an invitation? Apologize. The storms of life can be treacherous, they can be difficult. And the hope that Jesus offers is that he will be with us, that he will support us in the difficulties, the challenges that we face. And that promise is a great and precious promise. Peter talks, in our Bible class this morning, we talked about this idea that our salvation is something that we have right now, and it's also something that we look forward to. We have an earnest that will be redeemed at a later date. And that when we have that earnest, we have the assurance that Christ, as our high priest, will plead for us, that he will sympathize with us, that he will guide us and deliver us through the storms of life. That peace is available through redemption into the grace of God through the blood of Christ. And it's easy in the storms of life to forget that we have that promise. And if you need to renew your commitment to following Jesus, to trusting in his power to deliver you, or if you need to make that commitment to be buried with him in baptism and to receive the assurance of salvation and of guidance, please let us know as we stand and sing.